No one on Crestfall Drive could have predicted that a quiet afternoon would explode like a grenade. The sun was mild. A lawnmower hummed lazily down the street. The scent of freshly baked apple pie lingered in the air. Then, the screeching of tires sliced through the calm like a blade. 3 matte black, unmarked armored vehicles stormed onto the street. Doors flew open. Dozens of figures in full tactical gear spilled out like shadows given form. "SWAT! Everybody down! Hands where we can see them!" Marjorie Hale, 66, had just parked in her driveway, arms full of groceries, bread, milk, a few red apples, when 3 rifles turned on her. A young officer shouted, panicked and high-strung, "Drop the bags! Final warning!" Marjorie froze, not out of defiance, but because her arthritic hands, twisted by years of pain, no longer obeyed her. She tried, but she wasn't fast enough for men in body armor with their fingers on triggers. "Non-compliant!" the officer shouted. The crackle of a taser split the air. Marjorie convulsed and collapsed like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Fruit rolled, milk burst open, eggs shattered across the driveway. Gordon Hale, pinned face down with his hands zip-tied behind him, his cheek pressed against the pavement, watched his wife fall. He had survived war zones, but never had he been this powerless, watching the woman he loved crumple on the concrete of their front yard. Gordon didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't thrash like a desperate husband. He lay still, his eyes wide open, watching his wife convulsing beside broken eggs and splintered groceries, while tactical boots stomped across apples rolling into the gutter. His face didn't show rage, but inside, a storm had already begun. Then, something switched. He wasn't the old repairman anymore. He wasn't a retired neighbor. Something colder, something trained, surfaced from deep within him. His breathing slowed. His voice cut clean through the noise. "Untie me." No one moved, until Gordon turned and locked eyes with the SWAT commander, a gaze like steel pressed against skin. The commander hesitated, then gave a nod. A hesitant officer stepped forward and sliced the zip tie. Gordon rose slowly, his limbs stiff and bruised. He didn't run to his wife, though everything inside him screamed to do so. He didn't cry out. He didn't rage. He walked straight toward the SWAT commander, surrounded by rifles still trained on him. Each step is deliberate, unflinching. Then he stopped, met the commander's eyes, and spoke 5 calm, chilling words. "Contact General Calderwood. Right now." The street fell silent. One rookie chuckled nervously. "What's next, Grandpa? Area 51? But the commander wasn't laughing. There was something in Gordon's voice, not panic, not a threat, just the undeniable weight of someone used to giving orders in places too dark to name. Gordon Hale wasn't a man whose name ever made headlines. There were no medals on his walls, no plaques in a museum, just a rusted metal box buried deep in his basement, triple locked, and a past he had never fully told anyone. On Crestfall Drive, people knew him as Mr. Hale, the guy who could fix anything. The neighborhood kids called him Uncle Gordon, the man who patiently taught them how to change oil and reattach spark plugs. He didn't talk much, didn't smile often, and he always ended his lessons with the same quiet advice. Whatever you do it right. Only Marjorie truly knew who he really was. She had walked with him through sleepless nights, calmed his breath when phantom helicopters roared through his dreams. She had pieced him back together over years, word by unsaid word. Gordon once disappeared for 9 months. When he returned, no one asked, and he never explained. Only once, while rotating a car tire, he said to Marjorie, "I've walked through places where they'll kill you just for looking too long." He lived like that, silent, watchful, unassuming, a ghost cloaked in denim and grease, hiding in the most ordinary place, suburbia. Until today. when his wife was tasered in their driveway, when a SWAT team kicked down the wrong door and awoke something the government itself had hoped would never need to wake again, and when he said, "Contact General Calderwood," it wasn't a threat. It was a key to a door most men didn't even know existed. Lieutenant Brent Hollis, commander of the SWAT team, felt something he hadn't in years: fear. Gordon Hale stood before him, rugged, older, with hands marked by decades of labor and war, but with the presence of a man who didn't need weapons to command a battlefield. "You're standing in front of 421 Crestfall Drive," Gordon said calmly. "But your warrant is for 421 Crest Hill Avenue, 6 miles away, completely different zip code." No one spoke. A young officer double-checked the paperwork. Another whispered into the radio. Faces paled. As they stood frozen, a woman still lay motionless on the driveway, her fragile heart beating irregularly from the shock, her groceries strewn like battlefield wreckage. Milk puddled beneath her. Blood darkened her knee where she'd collapsed, and not a single member of the team dared to look her way. Gordon turned to Marjorie, reading her like a mission profile. Shallow breathing, slight tremor in the fingers, a weak but present pulse. Then he faced Lieutenant Hollis and spoke in a tone colder than steel. "My wife has a history of cardiac arrhythmia. If she dies because of your trigger-happy rookie, Calderwood will be the least of your problems." Hollis swallowed hard. This was no longer a drug bust. This was a tactical catastrophe, an illegal assault on a civilian residence. And worse, they had accidentally engaged someone the Department of Defense preferred never to acknowledge publicly. At that moment, a distant voice called out, holding up Gordon's worn leather wallet, retrieved during a pat-down. "Lieutenant, you need to see this." Hollis stepped forward and took the ID card from inside. It wasn't the name that chilled him. It wasn't the faded photo. It was a barely visible insignia in the corner. A Black Hawk, wings tucked. The Black Hawk seal. He had only ever seen it once, in a restricted-level training briefing. And now it was in his hand. The air had thickened like molasses. The SWAT officers glanced at each other. No one dared lift their rifles anymore. No commands were needed. The name Gordon Hale now carried more weight than their badges and weapons combined. Lieutenant Hollis's hand trembled as he held the ID card. His eyes locked on the Black Hawk insignia, as if it might burn him just for looking. He barked into the comms. "Priority link, Joint Special Operations Command, code Black Hawk, direct line to General Adrian Calderwood. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." Everyone fell silent, and Gordon just stood there, solid as a relic carved from every war no one dared speak of. What others saw as an old man was, in truth, a dormant threat reawakened by stupidity. He lowered his voice, deeper now, heavier, colder. "I don't bluff, Lieutenant. Not when my wife is lying there with a weakened heart, and one of your kids decided to play cowboy with a taser. He's not the one I blame, not if this were a war zone. But this is my home." A young officer, the same one who had fired, turned pale, trembling, fingers clutching his rifle like a life raft. He was about to be sick, and Gordon knew it. But he didn't look at him. He didn't speak to the one who pulled the trigger. He was speaking to the system that loaded the weapon and pointed it blindly. Gordon stepped toward Lieutenant Hollis, his gaze sharp as a scalpel, each word sliced deeper than any reprimand. "This isn't law enforcement, Lieutenant. This is occupation tactics in suburbia. And if you don't get your men under control in the next 60 seconds, you'll be replaced by people who don't need guns to command obedience." And then it came. A distant rumble, not of thunder, but of rotors. Low, steady, precise. Not a police chopper. No sirens. Just the unmistakable hum of authority descending. The rotor blades screamed through the sky like they were slicing the very air itself. Residents on Crestfall Drive peeked out from their curtains, faces pressed to the glass with a mix of awe and dread. Two matte black helicopters, unmarked and silent, dropped low above the treetops, graceful, deliberate, lethal. They landed without needing assistance or clearance, because no one had the authority to stop them. No uniforms stepped out. Just men in charcoal suits, no badges, no names. But every step they took said one thing: "We're not here to ask." At the front of the group, a man with sharp eyes and a voice that didn't need volume. He walked straight through the frozen SWAT team, as if they were invisible. Gordon turned. For the first time since the raid began, his face relaxed. Not out of relief, but because he recognized the man, not as a general, but as a comrade. "Gordon, you still know how to get everyone's attention." General Calderwood, chairman of the Joint Special Operations Command, strode straight to Gordon, completely ignoring the entire law enforcement presence. Gordon nodded. Marjorie was tasered. The kid over there, he got nervous. Calderwood didn't look at the officer. He just turned his eyes on him, eyes like forged iron. The rookie officer flinched. He knew instantly no amount of training or paperwork would save his career, because Calderwood's silence was more final than any court ruling. The medical response team arrived shortly thereafter. Not your average EMTs, but a federal mobile trauma unit, airlifted with equipment rivaling a city hospital. They quickly assessed Marjorie, connected monitors, and stabilized her, and began loading her into the helicopter. Gordon never left her side. Calderwood turned to Lieutenant Hollis, who now looked like a man about to face sentencing. "You raided a home protected under Black Hawk protocol. You pointed rifles at the only man I've ever asked for advice on the battlefield. Do you even understand what you've triggered here, Hollis?" The lieutenant couldn't speak. "Effective immediately," Calderwood said. "Your unit is disbanded. All further action falls under federal jurisdiction." Crestfall Drive now resembled a paralyzed stage. The SWAT officers, who had thundered onto the street with overwhelming force, stood frozen, their rifles lowered, their eyes wide with the dread of understanding. No one dared speak. No one dared move. From their comms, the orders dropped like hammers. Entire unit suspended, effective immediately. Taser officer under federal criminal review. Search warrant confirmed invalid. Severity level, critical. Chain of command, fully liable. Lieutenant Brent Hollis, who once believed a badge and a tactical vest made him unshakable, now stood with his head bowed, unable to meet Gordon's eyes, let alone General Calderwood's. Encrypted whispers continued to hiss through the headsets. Protocol violation. Breach of national defense zone. Unauthorized entry into Black Hawk cleared property. Marjorie, now stabilized, was carefully lifted onto the stretcher. Hooked up to monitors and oxygen, she was swiftly loaded into the waiting helicopter. Gordon walked beside her, step for step. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Each step he took behind the medical team was a silent indictment of everything that had just happened. General Calderwood stayed behind. He stood amid a swarm of officers who, mere moments ago, thought they were in control. Now they realized. They had just pointed rifles at a man whose very identity was more protected than a nuclear launch protocol. Calderwood turned to the local police chief, who had finally arrived, pale as chalk, like someone who had just glimpsed the edge of an abyss. "This won't disappear. Report to Washington. Now. There will be hearings, suspensions, and institutional reform." Crestfall Drive, a typical suburban street just hours earlier, had just become the epicenter of an invisible earthquake. No explosions. But its tremors would ripple to Capitol Hill. 4 days later. On an old wooden bench behind his house, Gordon Hale sat silently, a paring knife in one hand, peeling apples into a chipped porcelain bowl. His mind was far away. Marjorie had woken up that morning. Doctors said her heart had no permanent damage, just trauma and bruising that would take time to heal. He glanced through the kitchen window, saw her sleeping with a blanket over her legs, a paperback on her chest, and he felt like he had aged 10 years in 4 days. No local officers had dared return to their street. All communication came through a quiet federal liaison, a young woman with no gun, no badge, and no questions. Gordon didn't ask, but he knew. Eyes were watching. Just in case the real cartel, whose home was hit correctly miles away, thought Gordon had been involved. Calderwood came back, not as a general, but simply as Adrian, an old friend. "Whatever you need, say the word," he offered. "Hell, if you want to vanish again, we'll make it happen." Gordon shook his head. "I'm done disappearing. I just want to fix lawnmowers and live in a house where no one points a gun at me again." The next morning, he reopened his little backyard garage. The kids from the neighborhood came by again, grease on their hands, questions in their eyes. Marjorie sat on the porch with her tea, slowly knitting something blue. Crestfall Drive returned to peace, but no one saw Gordon the same way again. Everyone remembered. They remembered the day when he didn't scream, didn't panic, didn't fight. He just spoke 5 words, and the entire system froze beneath their weight. Because true authority doesn't shout. It doesn't wear medals or flashlights. It walks quietly, shaped by a lifetime of courage and silence, and only rises when the right thing needs defending.